Some archives should never be opened. Tonight, on Strange Archives, The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft. An isolated farm, a meteorite, and a color no one should ever have seen. Turn off the lights. Lower the volume a little. We are opening the file. I had been warned not to take the old road. In Arkham, people know how to look away when they speak of the western hills. They say there is nothing out there, only an abandoned road, a few collapsed farms, trees growing too close together, and a grey stretch of land where the grass refuses to grow. They lie, badly. I had come for the future reservoir. In a few months, if the plans were approved, the water would cover the valleys, the woods, the ruins, and that ash-colored scar the locals called the blasted heath. The engineers spoke of depth, flow, pumps, and pipes. The old people spoke of silence. I saw the place on a morning without sun. At the bottom of a bare slope, 5 acres of pale dust opened in the countryside like an old burn. No bushes, no insects, no bird song, only grey earth, too fine for the wind to lift. At the center, near the black stones of a collapsed cellar, there was a well. I did not approach it at once. I could not have said why. It was only an old ring of stone, a dark mouth in dead ground, and yet something about the light around that well was wrong. Daylight seemed to lose its nature there, as if ordinary colors hesitated before touching the rim. That same evening, I was told about Ammi Pierce. He lived alone, not far from the new road, in a tired house the woods seemed eager to take back. The people of Arkham said he had grown strange with age. They always added that he should not be listened to. That is why I went to see him. He opened the door after a long knocking. His white beard fell over a worn coat, and his eyes avoided the sky as if the light itself hurt him. When I mentioned the reservoir, he did not protest. On the contrary, he seemed relieved. "Best if the water covers it all," he said. "Best if no one ever sees what is left out there again." Then he told me the story of Nahum Gardner. Before the strange things began, the Gardner farm was one of the finest in the valley. A white house, orchards, a solid barn, 3 strong sons, and Nabby, Nahum's wife, who knew every tree on the land. Ammi visited them often. He was 40 years old then, and he swore that nothing evil haunted the hills yet. Then the meteorite fell. It was in June, at a noon too bright. A series of dry detonations cracked across the sky, then smoke rose behind the woods. By evening, all Arkham knew that a stone from the sky had buried itself near the gardener's well. Nahum had come into town, almost proud despite his fear. He said the stone was enormous, hot, and that it had glowed in the night. The next day, 3 professors from Miskatonic University went to the farm. They found the meteorite still smoking in the split earth, but it was already smaller than Nahum had described. At first, the learned men smiled. Stones do not shrink. Then they touched it. It refused to cool. Under the hammer, it did not break like rock. It yielded almost like something soft. They took a fragment and carried it to the laboratory in an old kitchen pail. Before they had even reached Arkham, the piece had blackened the metal of the pail and lost part of its mass. For several days the university stirred with activity. They heated the fragment, plunged it into acids, placed it before the spectroscope. Nothing reacted as it should have. The substance seemed to belong to a law that was not the law of our world. In darkness, it gave off a faint glow. In the spectrum, it revealed bands no one could name. The scientists spoke of new elements. Ammi remembered mainly their faces. The second time they returned to the farm, the stone had shrunk again. When they opened its surface, they found a small globule sealed inside the mass, bright, smooth, colored in a way words refuse to carry. They called it a color because it had to be called something. When a hammer struck it, it burst with a small, dry sound. Nothing came out, and yet everyone there felt that something had just been released. The following night, a storm fell upon the farm. Lightning struck the same point 6 times near the well. By morning, the meteorite had vanished. Only a wet pit remained, with scorched grass and an odor Nahum could never describe. For a few weeks, life seemed to resume. The newspapers spoke of the stone. Curious visitors came as far as the fence. Nahum answered their questions, a little embarrassed, a little proud. Then the summer advanced, very hot, and the orchards began to bear. No one had ever seen fruit like it. Pears hung from the branches like heavy lamps. The apples were smooth, swollen, almost luminous at sunset. Melons, tomatoes, corn, everything seemed fed by a mad abundance. But when the first fruits were tasted, they were spat out at once. Beneath their magnificent skins, there was a bitterness that was not merely a taste. It was like biting into something that imitated food without understanding life. All of it was lost. Nahum said the meteorite had poisoned the soil. He was wrong. Winter came early. The tracks in the snow changed. Rabbits, foxes, squirrels still passed around the farm, but their prints had false proportions. The horses refused to approach the barn. The dogs did not lose their voices. They lost the desire to bark. In spring, the plants returned. They did not return green. In the ditches, along the walls, around the well, they grew in shades the eye accepted badly. They were neither red, nor blue, nor violet, though they seemed to contain a little of all those things. At night, Ammi swore he saw the leaves glow very faintly, as if the light no longer fell from the sky, but rose from the ground. The professors were warned. They answered cautiously. A mineral might have passed into the soil. The farmers were afraid. The plants were strange, certainly, but farmers are quick to see omens in weeds. So the scientists did not return. The Gardner farm was left alone with what was growing. In May, the insects became too numerous. They crawled, flew, and droned at hours when their species should have slept. The trees sometimes moved without wind. At night, the yard was never entirely dark. Then the water in the well changed. Ammi was the first to notice it. He had taken one swallow and stopped, the bucket still in his hand. It was not salt, nor rot, nor the taste of mud. It was an impossible flavor, a flavor that seemed to come from another geometry of matter. He advised Nahum to dig another well. Nahum nodded. He did nothing. By then, something had already worn down the will of the gardeners. They performed the gestures of the day without believing in them. They ate little. They spoke less. Sometimes one of them would stop in the middle of a task and listen to an absence. Nahum was the first to give way. She spoke of things moving in the air, of walls changing place, of sounds entering the nerves without passing through the ears. She named nothing. She only said, "It comes, it takes, it drinks." Nahum locked her in an upper room when the boys began to fear her. He did not call it cruelty. He called it holding on for one more day. The animals fell next. The poultry dried out. The pigs swelled, then turned grey and friable. The cows, shut inside a closed barn, were struck by an illness no veterinarian could explain. Their bodies lost their form, as if an invisible hand were removing matter from within. In September, everything that had flowered crumbled into grey powder. Nahum's son Thaddeus came back from the well one evening with an empty bucket and eyes that were no longer those of a boy. He spoke of colours moving in the water. A week later, he was locked in another room, across from his mother's. Little Merwin sometimes heard their voices answering each other behind the doors. He said they used no language of the earth. Then Merwin disappeared. He had gone out at night with a lantern and a bucket. Nahum heard a cry in the yard. When he reached the outside, the child was gone. In the morning, near the well, they found what remained of the lantern, a mass of twisted metal, as if it had melted without fire. After that, Ammi did not go to the farm for 2 weeks. When at last he returned, no thread of smoke rose from the chimney. The house seemed cold before he even entered. The bare trees lifted branches toward the sky that looked as if they had learned hatred. Nahum was still alive. He was lying in the kitchen, too weak to rise. He asked for wood, though the fireplace was empty. He spoke of Zenas, his last son, as if the boy had gone on an errand, then added that the boy lived in the well. Ammi understood that he had to go upstairs. He took the keys, climbed the stairs, and opened Nabby's room. He never told me exactly what he saw. He only said the room was dark, that the air in it was foul, and that what remained in one corner still had a slow, almost imperceptible movement. He closed the door. As he went down, he heard something fall in the kitchen, then a dragging sound, then a wet noise like suction. Nahum had left his bed, or something had drawn him from it. Ammi found him near the door, already coming apart. The gray was rising over his skin, his face was losing its contours, and yet his mouth still managed to form a few words. "It was not a disease," Nahum said. "It was a color. It lived in the well. It burned cold. It drank life. It had come in the stone, in those small globules the scientists had broken. Seeds, perhaps. Seeds from elsewhere." Then Nahum asked where Nabby was. After that, he spoke no more. Ammi left the house without passing near the well. He ran all the way to Arkham and warned the authorities. That very evening he returned with policemen, a doctor, a coroner, and the veterinarian who had seen the beasts die. They found too many things. They emptied the well. What they drew out of it, I will not say. It is enough to know that Merwin and Zenas had not gone into the woods, and that the bottom of the well did not seem to have a bottom. The pole they lowered into it descended into porous mud, full of bubbles, as if the earth beneath the farm were no longer earth. Night fell while they argued in the parlor. It was the coroner who saw the glow. It rose from the well, faint at first, then clearer. a nameless color, too pale to be fire, too alive to be a reflection. It settled on the puddles, on the rim, on the trunks of the dead trees. Ammi recognized it. The globule in the meteorite, the flowers of spring, the sick leaves, the flash glimpsed against the window of the upper room. All of that had never been several phenomena. It was one thing. The horses screamed outside. The men remained motionless at the window. There was no wind, and yet the trees in the yard began to move. Their branches twisted toward the sky like fingers pulled by invisible strings. Then points of light appeared at the ends of the twigs. The entire farm began to shine. The ground, the walls, the wood of the doors, the empty hives, the remnants of grass. Everything that had lived, everything the farm had touched, now gave back the same color from out of space. The men finally understood that they had to run. They went out the back, crossed the fields, climbed to the high pasture, and only there dared to look down. The Gardner farm was no longer a house. It was an open wound in the night. The well was vomiting a formless light that did not rise like smoke and did not shine like flame. It seemed to remember the sky. It was calling something, or answering a call from beyond the stars. Then, all at once, the color leapt upward. It passed through the clouds by a perfectly round hole and vanished into the Milky Way. A moment later, the farm broke with a cracking of wood, stone, and dry matter. There was no explosion, only a collapse, as if whatever still held things together had just been removed. The men left without speaking, but Ammi looked back. And that, I think, is why he was never quite the same again. Because from the hill, in the darkness settling back over the ruins, he saw one last glow rise weakly from the well, then sink down again. Not all of the color had gone. 44 years have passed. Nothing has ever grown again on the blasted heath. People say the gray patch may be spreading, perhaps by an inch a year. The horses still refuse the old road. The dogs lose the trail. In spring, the plants at the edge are never exactly the right shade. The reservoir will soon cover the valley. They will say the water has washed the ruins clean. They will say Arkham's secrets sleep beneath meters of clear water. I remember the well. I remember the way the sun changed color around its black mouth. And when the pipes are opened, when the new water descends toward the town, I know one thing with certainty. I will not drink it. Thank you for listening to this file. Is there an image that stayed with you? Write it in the comments, and tell me which account we should open next. Subscribe to Strange Archives for the next files. See you soon. And be careful what people bury beneath the water.